Kia ora. Welcome to Baptist People. My name's Charles Hewlett.
And I'm Kathryn Heslop.
In our roles as National Leader and Executive Advisor within the Baptist Churches of New Zealand, we daily have the privilege of bumping into interesting people.
These podcasts give us the opportunity to introduce them to you and to let them shape us as we endeavour to bring gospel renewal to people and places.
In conversation, we explore something of their story.
Why do we find them so interesting? What are they giving their lives to? Where does the motivation come from?
We reflect together on both the highs and lows of their journey. Thanks heaps for taking the time to listen in today.
In today's episode, I talk with Linda Allen, Principal of Oratia District School. Linda has been Principal for nearly 7 years, 4 in an international school in Istanbul, Turkey, and nearly 3 back in New Zealand at Oratia. Linda is married to husband Craig with 3 adult children and 1 grandchild. She is passionate about meaningful and authentic connection to her family and friends, to the Lord and how He wants her to live her life, and to education and helping learning come alive. Today we talk together about women in the workplace, the New Zealand education system, and the concern that some parents experience over what our children are being taught in schools today. I start by asking Linda to tell us a little about herself.
Well, I am Eurasian. I'm a third culture kid. My mum is Chinese and my father's British, and they met when he was doing his national service. And he decided he would be adventurous, and since he had to give 2 years of his life to the government, he'd go somewhere exotic, and he went to Singapore. And through a series of events, they actually ended up meeting together and fell in love, and he chose to come back to New Zealand to marry her and raise a family. And so my siblings and I were first generation Kiwis, and actually my father's an army child. His father was in the British Army. So he's lived all around the world. And so actually, maybe because of that, we also, he wasn't afraid to sort of shift countries to get further opportunities for advancement. And so we've lived in New Zealand, Australia and Malaysia as children. And I've also lived in Istanbul.
Oh, wow.
So I trained as a teacher, and I've been in teaching, I counted it up this morning, 38 years. That's a long time.
Very experienced.
Masters, yeah. And my most recent experience before coming to be the principal at Oratia was we went to Istanbul, Turkey, because I really wanted to try my hand at international schooling. When we lived in Malaysia, I'd gone to an international school as a child, and it was just one of the most transformative, wonderful experiences of my life. I had always wanted to be a teacher, an international teacher. And I got to the stage in my life where my children were independent, and my husband and I thought we'd have an adventure. And we had a go and applied for some jobs, and I won a job at an international school in Istanbul. And I'd only been there a year when I was offered the principal's position. I went as the deputy principal, and then, I was fortunate enough to be offered the principal's position. And that was just as the ISIS war with Syria and Turkey on the Turkish border was ramping up. And we had a lot of internal turmoil with suicide bombings.
Wow.
We also had the coup, the attempted coup. And so there was a lot of turmoil and a lot of leadership decisions that needed to be made in that time. And interestingly, we returned to New Zealand at the end of 2019, just in time to prepare ourselves for COVID. So
I
was thinking that my most recent leadership positions have been ones guiding my team, my staff through quite traumatic and stressful times.
Yeah. So massive, 4 or 5 years for you?
That's right. Yeah. Well, actually, 7. Yeah.
7.
4 years in Istanbul, nearly 3 years here. So.
Wow. So I bet that experience has just given you a wealth of leadership skill and, managing those kinds of environments.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the questions that you've asked me to consider. And I think that one thing I learned through those times, and I'm still learning, is the power of relationships.
Right.
And how the tone of your school, your environment is key to everything progressing well. And so the work you put into the relationships and the connections that you form is vital.
Yeah. So that's a key leadership takeaway right there. Yeah. Wow. So you're a mother of 3, Linda.
Yes.
So how on earth, 38 years teaching, how on earth did you manage the juggle of life, raising children while having a career?
Well, as you say, I've got 3 children. They are all adults now and all happy and sort of in employment and working independently. I feel very blessed with the decisions that they've been making. But raising them when we were going through was actually pretty wonderful. My 30s were one of my favorite decades. That's when I was sort of really involved with raising my kids. But it was a big juggle. And my husband's always been self-employed. And so we've been through some downs in that time. And so those are the motivation for us as a couple to make the decision for me to go back to work. So I would say that managing the juggle was definitely because of the support I got from my husband, from Craig.
Yeah.
He, in all our decisions about whether or not I was going to go back to work, how he was going to go, what we did, we talked it through, we prayed about it, we made a agreed decision, and we said that we would do what it took to make it work. And I had huge support from my wider family. My mother was a strong believer in women having a career. She had been training to be a nurse when she met my father, and had fully intended to continue that when she came to New Zealand, but they'd been given some inaccurate information and been told that she could just transfer and carry on her training, and then she couldn't.
Oh no.
And so for whatever reason, they chose for her to just start over again. And so she never really fulfilled that desire to be that career person, that nurse. And so she wanted to make sure that we didn't lose that opportunity because of circumstances. So she looked after my children on for a day or two here or there, or right through. And I was 11 years off full-time work where I just did relieving or job sharing or part-time work. Sometimes I worked a whole year full-time just because of the way that the birth of the children fell. But it was about 11 years of interrupted teaching, full-time teaching. And I had a really good friend whose little boy was the same age as my youngest, and when I went back to work full-time, she looked after Mitchell for me. And my sister was amazing, and she just had the children back. They walked home to her house with her children, and she just looked after them after school for me until I could pick them up. Yes. So
a real community.
It
takes a village to raise a child.
Absolutely. Couldn't have done it without the others.
So I mean, was that something that enabled you to keep up with all of the demands? Like, how did you keep going through all those years? That sounds like the biggest juggle.
We were really tired. I think definitely that extended family and friend support was the key. We did work long hours, but we made deliberate choices too in the things that we got involved with. And my husband and I were just laughing actually when I was telling him about these questions that you were going to ask me, and he said, I remember us talking with our middle child Joe, and he really wanted to play cricket on a Saturday. And it was right in the midst of this really busy years, and he said, darling, we love that you want to play sport. He was already fully involved in soccer and swimming, and we said, we can't commit to that amount of time to come and watch you every week. We just don't have that space. So if you really want to do cricket, we'll support you. You can do it. We can't come and watch. And then his dad said, and actually, Joe, to be perfectly honest, I'd rather take you to the beach and go surfing. And Joe thought about it, and he thought, yeah, me too. So so surfing was one of the things that kept that relationship going through the very difficult teenage years.
That's awesome. It's funny you mentioned cricket, because I've got the exact same scenario playing out with our youngest boy at the moment. He is cricket mad, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, cricket takes all day on a Saturday. I
totally get your it's a tough decision. But I do think that we just worked really hard.
So what was the hardest part about all of it? And what helped you the most?
I think the hardest part of all of that juggle was feeling secure in our own decisions about what we made for our family and not being swayed by people's perceptions or expectations of us. Because while it was nice to have people like my mum say, you know, you need to keep going, you need to stay focused on your career, don't give it up, it's a worthwhile thing to keep ticking over. And I had friends who were, you know, getting ready to have children, and I can remember one saying, oh, I think you're such a wonderful role model of how you can do it all, you know, you can work and you can have it. And I didn't feel like I was a role at all surviving. But it was a matter of necessity for our case because of the you know, the financial situation. But I also had some of my friends who gave me quite a hard time about the fact that I was choosing my career over my children, in their opinion, that I was not doing best by my children by working. And, you know, I had some very, you know, upset times. And I think the thing that really helped me through was the fact that Craig and I had talked this through fully. We were in agreement. We had prayed. We had asked that God would guide our steps, that he would open the doors. We always have the feeling that if God opens a door, then we'll walk through. We'll trust him and we'll walk through and we'll see what happens. And so we felt that the doors had been open for me to return to work. We had all the support in place. And I think having people to talk to in that time really helped. And my sister's just one of my best confidants. So she was able to be a really good sounding board. That relationship opened with Craig, with my husband.
So definitely team approach is obviously very important. I think for women, like I reflect on that in my own journey, having times of being the stay-at-home mum and then times of working and the juggle. And I remember reading an article quite a number of years back about women and how no matter what decision you choose, you've almost always got this internal sort of battle that you have to sort out in your own mind. Because if you choose to be a stay-at-home mum, then you've also given up something else. And if you choose the career path, then you've given up, you know, other things. So I think it's hard from all perspectives.
I agree. I would totally concur with that. It doesn't matter which choice you make. There are aspects that are positive and negative. And so you just have to decide what works for you and then try and find a way through. And I guess be open to the fact that maybe your decision wasn't the right thing and it might not last forever. You know, it might be good for this year, but maybe not for the next year. And I don't know, that's certainly how we had to face it.
So it's sort of like just keep reflecting on it and praying about it and approaching it as a team and working out what's best for you as a family. So we hear stats about the inequalities that exist for women in the workplace today. So, you know, women have less leadership opportunities, lower pay, less respect. Do you think it's harder for women in leadership roles, and in what ways?
I think being in education, I'm fortunate that there are opportunities for women. There are lots of women principals and deputy principals, team leaders. And I know in the past, even though teaching was overrepresented by women in that workforce, the majority of leaders were men. That statistic is shifting a little bit, certainly in New Zealand anyway. And when I look around the room at my Principals Association meetings and things, you know, there's a good gender blend, there's a good mix. So I do think that education gives opportunities for women, but I do think that in terms of the age, that men get opportunities for leadership in education earlier than women. They might be in their late 20s, early 30s, and they might get a VP or a principal's role, whereas the majority of women don't get that opportunity because, well, they're taking time off to have their children. So it's very difficult to be in two places at once. And some do it, but the majority, they're older, you know, before they get to the... And I think what you were talking about before in terms of doesn't matter which choice we make, there are things that we lose or that is, I think, one of the things that plays out for women in leadership, that raising your family is the most amazing leadership opportunity you can possibly have,
Yeah.
if you view it that way, but it doesn't bring in much money. And and so not that every career is based just on money, of course. It's based on passion and your, you know, what you feel called to. But lots of us make the decision that having children is a really important part of our lives, and we choose to focus on that. And so we set aside the career path and we pick it up later.
Yes.
And so it's like, well, that's where we get the lower pay. If you compare, you know, the straight statistics and the leadership opportunities, I think it's because some of us opt out of those opportunities because we choose to focus on other things. And I don't know about less respect, because I can only really speak for, you know, us in the education, my experience in the education force.
Yeah.
And I do feel that there are still aspects where we're stereotyped and or typecast in terms of the way that we respond, our decision-making processes, the point of view we bring to the world.
Yeah.
It's very different from the stereotypical male perspective. And some people really like a male way of doing things, and others appreciate the female. But I just feel that if you can have good collaboration in your leadership team and you have an opportunity for voice, both male and female, to speak into the decision-making process, get the best of both.
Yeah.
So I do think that there are aspects of what you're talking about, inequalities, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes the statistics that they quote, you know, you can make statistics say whatever you want them to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think they always take into account the deliberate choices that women have chosen to make.
Yeah, that's interesting perspective. And like you say, with the collaboration, that comes back to what you're talking about at the beginning of this, about relationship. And so, you know, if you have good relationship with your team and collaboration, then that's probably the best approach anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so we hear scary statistics about the state of New Zealand children's reading, writing, and maths abilities today. You know, I read an article titled New Zealand's Great Education Decline. It said, over the last 20 years, our education system has slipped from being the envy of the world to barely mediocre. You know, we hear scathing reports. So as a mum of 3 myself, I would like to ask you, Linda, are our kids going to be okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good.
I am a great believer in the New Zealand education system.
Yeah.
Because not just because I'm in it myself, but because I've taught in other countries, I have led in other countries, I have recruited teachers from around the world, and I know how highly respected New Zealand teachers are held around the world, how well our New Zealand teachers are in terms of being able to create curriculum, and knowing where children are at and being able to take them forward and stretching them and growing them, and at the other end and catering for their diverse needs. And so I feel very confident about the quality of New Zealand teaching compared to other nations around the world that may have slightly higher stats perhaps in the reading, writing and maths. And I also think that New Zealand education has, in the last 20 years, chosen to focus more holistically and looked at things like key competencies such as decision making and critical thinking, creativity. And when I compare what great education giants like Sir Ken Robinson, who speaks about creativity and the need, and I look at our New Zealand curriculum and what we choose to focus on, I feel very positive about things. And I know too that New Zealanders around the world are revered for their high work ethic, their flexibility, their problem-solving ability, and their ability to work with others. And when we read reports about what are the things that make a worker employable in the 20th century, these are the things that keep getting raised.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's not whether you got an A+ on your maths. But in saying that, I do believe that it's been a long time since the New Zealand curriculum has had a review, and we're in the midst of that now. Yeah. I do believe that there has been a shift away in teacher training towards a more academic education degree focus rather than a more apprenticeship style teaching know-how. Yeah. So I imagine that there's going to be a lot of tweaking and shaking up in the next decade
Okay.
to try and make some changes in that area. And for myself, at our school, we're doing a review of our maths program. That's our focus this year, because we feel that we want to make sure that what we're teaching meets the needs of our kids and is what is considered best practice.
Nice. Yeah.
So we're doing that. And we're also looking at a new literacy approach for New Zealand, which is structured literacy. And that's focusing more on phonetics and phonics, rather than the whole language approach that has been very popular in New Zealand for the last little while. So being Kiwis, we're really good at picking the cherries out of all the things that are around and taking it in and making blending it and making a strong system for ourselves. And I think that's one thing that New Zealand educators are very good at, and that's seeing the value in a variety of things and not having to stick solely to one particular methodology, which can have its downfalls too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so positive to hear, because, you know, if all we're seeing is the media reports, then it is quite concerning. So it's really good to hear. Yeah. Another thing that I've picked up on is, you know, I've had conversations with Christian parents around, you know, the information that our children are being taught in schools today. So topics such as how the world was created, morals, sex education. We experience a loss of control over what information is being taught to our children. And, you know, based on some of the conversations that I've had in Christian circles, there seems to be almost a sense of panic. Is this something that we should be concerned about?
It's a really interesting question. And one I have had some experience with as a principal, you know, with some parents calling me about aspects of the curriculum that they weren't comfortable with. And just they're Christians, they were questioning it. And just it helped crystallize, I think, my perspective on our role as parents. Because if we send our children to a state school, it's secular.
Yes.
And so that's the education that they're going to get. And I think as parents, if we are really concerned about the sort of learning that and upbringing that we want our children to be raised with, then we have to take our share of responsibility for that.
Okay.
And so if we think that I can send my child to school and they'll get all the learning that they need to be a good person, and they'll understand how the world works according to my Christian perspective, I think you're abdicating responsibility.
Right.
Because in today's secular New Zealand, Christians are a very decreasing minority. There's less and less. And I believe that we have the opportunity to teach our children what perspective means, teach our children what critical thinking means, and to teach our children that somebody can have a different point of view from us, and that's okay. Because I think if we only expect our children to hear one voice, one perspective, and we haven't given them the chance to sort of tussle with decisions and stretch that decision-making muscle and understand about that rub that comes when someone tells us something that we don't necessarily agree with and how to counter that.
Yes.
If we don't give them that opportunity as they're growing up, when they become teenagers, and we see this all the time, they get out of the circle of influence of the family and they get opened up to what the rest of the world thinks, and they go, oh, I didn't know all of that. I'd like to explore all of that. And I think some parents, some Christians might think, well, it's the fault of school because they didn't educate our children well enough in the ways of the Lord. Yet, and everybody, you know, I think post-Christian, post-modern New Zealand has become more and more secular. And I think many of us who are in Christian circles surround our families and our friends are all still part of that world. And so I don't think we always realize just how much things have shifted. And so we're a bit protected and isolated. And I just feel that every time your child comes home with a question, a wonderful opportunity to say, well, honey, this is what we believe. This is what we feel the Lord tells us. This we trust the Bible. The Bible says this. And you have the opportunity to, as a parent to influence your child in meaningful ways to help make good decisions and good choices.
Yeah. So don't panic about it. See it as a bit of an opportunity to teach our children how to think critically and how to be okay about hearing something that they may not agree with and to unpack that themselves. And
yeah, I think that's fair, because I think too that a lot of Christians, we don't really know what we believe either.
Right.
And when we're asked to defend it, we retreat to offense, not defense,
Yeah.
And I think we get sort of outraged and upset rather than accepting the fact that the world is full of different perspectives, and we need to, having lived in Turkey for 5 years amongst all those Muslim people, they're just the most beautiful people. They love their families, they love God. Many of them are very devout. They want to do what's right for the world, but they have a very different perspective to us and what we think. And yet that doesn't make them wonderful, stop making them wonderful people. And I think that's one of the challenges that we as Christians need to have, is to see what God sees in people.
Because we almost just get overcome by fear and
and we allow that to influence our thinking and acceptance of people.
So as parents, how do we deal with that? Do we become really proactive with trying to find out, all of the lessons or all of the learnings that our children are being taught, or do we just organically wait for the conversations to happen? And how proactive do we need to be?
I think too that one of the challenges with some of the stuff that comes to us from the ministry is that it's been written by people very passionate about that area, and so they have a viewpoint and a perspective, but most teachers are fairly conservative, middle of the road,
right?
Because we get so many sways of policy, backwards and forwards. One government comes in, one government goes out. They all have their own opinions about different things, and we learn to walk the middle road, so that we can, like I say, pick the best out of everything. So most teachers are very open to hearing from parents. If it comes from a reasonable perspective, a help me understand perspective. So don't be afraid to question and ask, and just to get more information about what's being taught. But I also think you shouldn't be afraid about what is being taught, because even if it's from just that secular values-based perspective, there is generally a lot of respect and positive worldview that's there and amongst it. And yes, there could be differences from a Christian perspective and the world. Science has a different perspective on evolution than the Bible, but there's plenty of Christian scientists that have found a way to bridge the two. So, I think that whatever we do, we need to listen to our children, and if they have questions, or if they talk around the dinner table with you, then rather than saying, oh, you shouldn't be thinking that, you shouldn't have heard that, they'll shut down, they won't share with you. But if you're around the dinner table and you're talking about what's been talking about at school, what are you finding interesting? Is there what's your focus, and your topic, and whatever around those ideas, and you have a general conversation, and it's invitational. I use that word again. Children feel listened to, they feel heard, they feel their perspective is valued by the family, and they're not shut down for having a slightly different perspective. And it encourages them to keep sharing and to keep exploring ideas. So if something gets raised by your child that you have concerns about, then contact the teacher and just say, hey, my kid said something at the dinner table last week, and I've been thinking about it, and I was wondering if you could help me unpack what's going on around that a little bit more. And they, I think that they would be quite reassured by what's going on. And often what a child brings home isn't always as what was presented. We have a funny saying at school that we'll believe 10% of what your child tells you about what goes on at home, if you'll believe 10% of what goes on at school.
It goes both ways, doesn't it?
No, I just think keep the communication open with your children. Don't try and tell them that they're wrong for thinking
Yes.
a certain thing.
Yeah.
Help them explore it, help them try and see your perspective, but be gentle.
Yeah.
And just help them see that there are different points of view in the world.
Yeah. So take them on a journey with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. That's really helpful. Yeah. So tell us, Linda, what is the greatest opportunity and privilege that you have in your role as principal of a local primary school?
Well, I feel very privileged to be in such a position of influence.
Yeah.
I feel that with that comes a great responsibility, because I would like to think that I am modeling the values and the expectations for behavior and sort of communication levels that I would like to see demonstrated in my school community. Me to my teachers, teachers to children, me to parents, parents to each other, children to children. I'd like to think that I'm making school a great place to come to every day, that kids are happy to come to school, that parents are happy to send their children to us, that my teachers are really delighted to come to work there.
Awesome.
And that people feel valued and nurtured to, be their best. So, I mean, I'm still in teaching education because I love helping children grow in their understanding of themselves, in their ability to take risks and to try new things and learn to express themselves. So I want it to be a safe place, and that they can grow to be the people that God has made them to be.
Yeah.
While I might not be I choose not to be, I guess, very overt in the fact that I don't pray before a meeting. We do karakia, and I always ask the Holy Spirit to put his blessing over that, because I think it's an interesting little pathway in that the Lord's given us. Schools. And so I choose to embrace it as that.
Nice.
And I accept that. And I think that's that perspective thing, the Māori have this beautiful spiritual dimension and acceptance of it. And they were very open to the gospel when it came because of that. And so when we have opportunities to share in karakia and in the tikanga of Māori, I think it adds a beautiful spiritual dimension that I ask the Holy Spirit to bless. And so I guess I just have that ability to be a person of influence. And I guess my greatest prayer is that the decisions I make and the way I act reflect the Lord. So that because people that are within the school community, they know I'm a Christian, I don't try and hide that at all. That it makes it sort of attractive, and maybe that it'll plant a seed,
Yeah, absolutely. Being the light to your community and with the influence that you have.
Definitely.
Okay. Awesome. It's been so lovely to chat with you today, Linda. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for inviting me in. It was wonderful.